Niwahaskanu, Gayaji Gainhia'a. I am thankful that you are well. My Ungwehui name or original name is Gainhia'a, and my colonized name is Betty Lyons, and I'm a proud citizen of the Onondaga Nation. I'm also the executive director of the American Indian Law Alliance, and I welcome you all to this fine conference on Mother Earth's pandemic, the Doctrine of Discovery. This information is so important, and you all have made it possible to be able to get this education and information out, and I hope that you'll do great things with what you learn from here. First, I'd like to start by talking to you about the Doctrine of Discovery. This is a papal bull of the 15th century which gave Christian explorers the imagined right to claim lands they discovered and lay claim to those lands for their Christian monarchs. Any land that was not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited. If the pagan inhabitants could be converted, they may be spared, but if not, they would be enslaved or killed. This was the root cause of what continues to plague our nations and peoples today. With a flag and on bended knee, these evil acts were sanctified and made lawful to these Christian explorers. It is the notion still held today and exercised as law that we are less than human and therefore have no rights to our lands, territories, and resources. The United States Supreme Court in 2005, relying on a series of Indian law cases going back to 1823, specifically cited the doctrine in its decision denying the right of the Oneida Nation of New York to regain its territory. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote in the 2005 decision, under the Doctrine of Discovery, fee title to the land occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign. First, the discovering European nation, and later the original states, and then the United States. In fact, the Doctrine of Discovery is the basis for all Indian land law in the United States and in Canada, and it has imposed similar burdens on Indigenous peoples and nations all over the world, in Australia, New Zealand, and in Africa, in Latin America, and in the island nations of the Caribbean and Oceania. More than 500 million Indigenous peoples around the globe live today with the effects of the doctrine's oppressive racism. This brings me to the origins of the transatlantic slave trade. I think it's very important in these times to talk about this period in time, how much the doctrine affected this area, and why Black Lives Matter. After the church and crown were bankrupt from the Crusades and from killing their own indigenous people, they turned their attention to the colonizing and committing genocide against the indigenous nations and peoples of the African continent. The church and crown's greed and lust for blood and gold, unsatisfied, they turned to looking for new lands to dominate and new peoples to dehumanize. In this process, 12 million enslaved Africans were brought to Turtle Island. I want to reiterate that, 12 million. European Christians saw indigenous Africans as an expendable and exploitable commodity, and the 12 million indigenous peoples of Turtle Island as terra nullius. Therefore, the genocide of indigenous peoples of Turtle Island has no different than clearing the land for extraction. 12 million, the numbers don't lie. 12 million that were brought here, and our own 12 million sisters and brothers throughout Turtle Island that were killed. Part of our Ungwehui lived history of this Doctrine of Discovery is the Sullivan-Clinton campaign. The campaign, ordered and organized by George Washington and his staff, was conducted in the lands of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Now, as Phil and Sandy told you, this is the birthplace of democracy, right here on the shores of Onondaga Lake. So it's important to note that they patterned their government, as they said, after our government, leaving out, of course, two very important things. That's Mother Earth and women. So the campaign that was ordered and organized by George Washington, he said, taking the war home to the enemy to break their morale, but you will not by any means listen to any overture of peace before the total ruinment of their settlements is effected. Our future security will be in their inability, to injure us, and in the terror with which the severity of the chastisement they receive will inspire them. I'm sorry, I was reading the quote. That more than 40 of our villages and stores of winter crops were burned and destroyed at that time. Every president now, from that day on to today, will always be known as Hunadagayas, which means town destroyer. And I think it's so important to talk about that because it really shows, especially with the administration that we have now, who is the only example, right? He was epitomizes the doctrine of discovery. And really, there was only one way to go after the doctrine of discovery is the administration that we are looking at now. There can be no reconciliation when there has been no conciliation. I think we find that it's so tiring to hear about how can we reconcile? How can we make this right? You can't possibly make over 500 years of genocide okay. There is no truth and reconciliation to be had when the genocide against indigenous peoples continues today and in the name of extractive global capitalism. The crown may have changed its name, but the church has remained the same. It also speaks volumes about the migration issue. That's what the United States calls it, right? And other countries talk about it as a direct result of the multinational extractive industry's thirst for more resources. Then they tell you our indigenous sisters and brothers that come here from the border after being forced out of their homes that they're not welcome. So I ask all of you, when did Mother Earth have borders? How do you possibly deport rivers, waterways, lands? It makes no sense. More than 500 million indigenous peoples around the globe that live today with the effects of the doctrine's oppressive racism. Not only do the oppressed suffer, but also the oppressor. But what I want to make very clear is that Mother Earth, unfortunately, suffers the most. And as I said earlier, you can't reconcile over 500 years of genocide, especially when that genocide continues today. Part of that genocide is cultural erasure. We are facing that now as we seek to represent ourselves as our own nations of peoples in the Olympics. Imagine the creators of the game not being able to play for our own confederacy and under our own flag. The fact that other countries think that they have the right to keep us out of the Olympic Games is absolutely unimaginable. As I conclude, I remind us all that everything is connected. Every living being on Mother Earth is connected, and we are all connected to one another. We all have to continue this fight together. As we have seen recently, we have seen supporters of symbolisms of oppression, statues, and flags defend these symbols in action as shrines to history. These symbols cannot be stripped of their white supremacist and white nationalist roots. If nations are invested in social transformation, they can start by demonstrating that commitment by removing every single white supremacist symbol. We need to work collectively, and I hope at the end of this conference, you will gain enough knowledge to be able to take back and start developing some practical ways to implement it in your own communities and homes. I thank you again for all joining us this evening and within the next couple of weeks. Niwaha.